Okay, I'm going to start and jump straight in and start with an example. So what I want you to do is imagine that you're wandering through the forest and you're foraging for wild mushrooms, okay? And you come across the following specimen and you have to make a decision. Is this edible or is it toxic? Okay? Now this obviously, as many people probably know, this is an exceptionally hard, difficult problem to solve. So based on at least 2,000 years worth of human foraging experience, the field of mycology has failed to come up with or written down any systematic strategy for solving this problem. You need local knowledge, in the field training, etc., etc. But then last year, something interesting happened. So an app was made available on the Apple App Store, and claiming to identify any mushroom instantly with just a picture. Okay? So you point your smartphone at a wild mushroom, and it will tell you which species it is, and whether it's toxic or edible. Now, what happened next was there was a huge Twitter storm. So lots of mycologists took to Twitter to register their dismay at the availability of this app. So Grant W. tells us this is probably the most potentially deadly app I've ever seen. Cab Davison tells us, wow, I've been picking 35 years, this terrifies me. And the Magnificent Gut tells us, as a mycologist, I see this as a deadly app, wow. Okay? So we seem to have a conflict between the app developers and the mycologists. So let's just look in a bit more detail at this conflict. So on the one hand, we have Quest Mobile, the app developers, who are essentially assuming that there must be a solution to this problem. We're in the age of AI and big data, therefore, why can't we, if we have enough data and a sophisticated enough learning algorithm, why can't we solve this problem and make good decisions? Fair enough. On the other hand, we have the mycologists, who are telling us, essentially, you can't identify wild fungi just by looking at them, and certainly not just from a picture, because the indicators of toxicity are highly uncertain. They're also often obscure. So animal interference, local weather conditions, and the maturity of the fungi can all have an impact. We also know that many edible species have so-called fatal twins, species that look very similar but are fatal if consumed. Interestingly, I think the majority of wild fungi remain undocumented, okay? And we're still discovering new forms of toxicity. So this is the kind of conflict we're looking at. Now, so who won? Well, the mycologists won. So what happened next was, in response to the Twitter storm, the app developers kind of re-advertised the app as distinguishing between wild truffles. That didn't work either, and as soon after, the app was just completely removed. Okay? So why am I telling you this example? Well, the question I want to address today is, faced with uncertainty, what are rational decisions? And in particular, what this example shows us is that it's always possible to quantify uncertainty. Right? The app developers, there's nothing to stop the app developers developing this app and estimating probabilities from observations. In the same way, there's nothing to stop an economist doing this or a cognitive scientist. But the question I want to ask today is, in what sense is it more rational, or when is it more rational to view uncertainty as unquantifiable? Okay, and what does that alternative look like? So today I'm really contrasting two kinds of schools of thought on this idea. We have the traditional, or rather the orthodox study of decision-making under uncertainty, which is so prevalent in economics. So here we're working on the assumption that Bayesian maximizers of expected utility are rational. Of course we face deep uncertainty. That's why we see techniques such as multiple priors, uninformed priors, second-order probabilities, etc., etc. Decision theorists know that quantifying uncertainty is very difficult. These techniques are basically techniques for quantifying our uncertainty or quantifying our uncertainty about the uncertainty, etc., etc. Now, I think most people would agree at some point this becomes absurd, and we need an alternative, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, an alternative way of looking at decision-making under uncertainty, and that's the study of ecological rationality. So what's the study of ecological rationality? Well, first of all, it's critical to understand that the starting off point is a different question. We're asking the question of what is rational when we're faced with unquantifiable uncertainty. Okay? And the response is algorithmic, not probabilistic. The responses are algorithmic, and a particular class of models, specifically called simple heuristics, And a defining characteristic of simple heuristics is they ignore information. So let me just make it clear that the study of ecological rationality is the study of the interaction between these algorithms, such as simple heuristics, natural environments, and some notion of performance, usually a statistical notion of performance. So what I want to do now is just make it clear what I mean by a heuristic, because this term can mean very different things. So let's look at another example, and that's the example of catching a ball. So imagine you're playing cricket. Somebody's hit a ball, it's high in the air, and it's approaching you. You need to catch it somehow. How do you do that? Well, let's first turn to what Richard Dawkins has to say on the matter. He says the following, and I quote him here from The Selfish Gene. He says, "When a man throws a ball high in the air and catches it again, he behaves as if he had solved a set of differential equations in predicting the trajectory of the ball." And then he goes on to say, at some subconscious level, something functionally equivalent to the mathematical calculation is going on. So the two most important words in this quote are as and if, because Dawkins doesn't really know. He's kind of imagining that there's this horribly complex calculation, which is how we should solve the problem. There's lots of variables we need to consider, lots of differential equations to solve, etc., etc. Now, he's right to be, unsure here, because there's a lot of work done on how humans and other animals solve these problems. And they tend to rely on a bunch of heuristics. One of those is the gaze heuristic. So what's the gaze heuristic? Well, you fix your gaze on the ball, you start running, and you adjust your running speed to maintain a constant angle of gaze. Okay, and that's the angle here, alpha. And if you do that, you're going to end up in a position to catch the ball. Okay, let me show you that again. So you need to adjust your running speed to maintain this a constant angle alpha. You'll end up in a position to catch the ball if you do that. Okay, so this illustrates an important point about heuristics. So remember, I told you that heuristics ignore information. And the gaze heuristic ignores all kinds of variables such as ball velocity, spin, wind direction, etc., etc. And we know there's lots of research showing that many animals use this heuristics, like bats, birds and dragonflies use it when negotiating their prey. There's also studies looking at how dogs catch frisbees. And another important point about this is that this view on the problem invokes a different information processing problem. We're no longer explicitly calculating the point that we need to end up in order to catch the ball. The problem unfolds. But the most critical point I want to make here is that heuristics, simple heuristics, are part of the explanation for how we deal with deep uncertainty, how we deal with the uncertainty of the natural world. So immediately I need to contrast this with the study of heuristics in behavioural economics. What I'm talking about is something completely different. Okay? So in behavioural economics, heuristics are seen as reasons or explanations of why people are systematically biased, why they're irrational. That's not the view I'm taking today. Another difference is when I talk about simple heuristics, I'm talking about precise, testable, computational models. I'm not talking about vague labels that are used so widely in behavioural economics. Okay, let me back that up by talking about another heuristic. So what I want to talk about now is the heuristic take the best. It's a very well studied heuristic. It essentially solves the problem, or it's an approach to solving the problem of how to rank pairs of objects on some criterion of interest, such as, for example, if objects in the environment are food items, which food item is likely to have a higher calorific content? Or if we're talking about objects in the environment being cities, then which city has a larger population? And I'm going to focus on this second task of estimating which city has a larger population based on when each city is described by a number of probabilistic cues. Okay, so in this example, there are 9 probabilistic cues, and so one of them is, does the city have an intercity train line, or does it have a university, and there are a bunch of others. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the simple heuristic take the best with some more sophisticated strategies. So what's take the best? Well, take the best ignores information. Remember, simple heuristics ignore information. How does it ignore information? Well, it orders cues using a very naive measure of the predictive ability of those cues, which ignores conditional dependencies. It doesn't compute a covariance matrix in any form. And then when it needs to make a decision, it just uses the first discriminating cue that it has. Okay? We need to contrast that with typical statistical models or machine learning models, which tend to model these dependencies. Some kind of covariance matrix is computed, and when we make a decision, we weigh and add all cues. For example, logistic regression. So what I'm going to do now is compare take the best with some other models. So what you see here is what I've done is I've plotted the predictive accuracy of a bunch of models. So on the x-axis we have the sample size. So that's how many objects in the environment you've observed before you estimate your model parameters. And on the y-axis we have predictive accuracy. So I'm comparing take the best with logistic regression, the best tree induction algorithm I could find, and the nearest neighbour classifier. And what you see is that take the best outperforms all these models across pretty much all sample sizes. This is not an exception, we find this in many environments. Now initially, people said that's not possible. How can you possibly outperform logistic regression by ignoring a covariance matrix and just using a single cue to make an inference? People came round to this fact, there was lots of demonstrations of it. Then a kind of a new form of response emerged, which was often by machine learning, people saying, yeah, these aren't serious models. Try something more sophisticated. Try a support vector machine. So I tried a support vector machine, and we see, yes, it performs better, but still take the best is outperforming it across many sample sizes. So by ignoring information, for example, the covariance between the cues, take the best is outperforming a wide range of other models. And we see this not just in an environment like this, but in other environments too. Okay, so now the question I need to answer is, well, how is this? Why is this the case? Specifically, why is ignoring information so beneficial? What I want to do is give another example. Okay, and it will explain why heuristics work in general. But the reason I'm choosing this example is visual; it's easy to comprehend. So what I've done is here is I plotted for each day of the year 2000 London's mean daily temperature. And on top of that, I've plotted, or I've superimposed, two polynomial models. So we have a degree 25 polynomial with 26 parameters, that's the red one. We have a degree 3 polynomial with 4 parameters, that's the blue one. You can see that the red one captures kind of monthly fluctuations, whereas the blue one, with only 4 parameters, charts a kind of a much simpler relationship, this rise and then this fall, rising towards the summer and then a fall. So the question I want to ask now is, which model is best? Now hopefully you all know this, but I'll run through it anyway. But which model is best depends entirely on the criterion we use to judge the models. So if we're interested in just fitting the observations, i.e. we have a bunch of observations, we estimate our model parameters, and then we look at the discrepancy between the two, then we see a very simple relationship, whereas if we increase the degree of the polynomial, so on the x-axis here you have the degree of the polynomial, the error goes down. Okay? Getting a good fit to data is not difficult. And it's also mistaken most of the time, I'd argue. So the other criterion, a far more reliable criterion for selecting between models, is to look at their predictive accuracy. So here you have a bunch of observations, you estimate your model parameters, and then you test the model on unseen observations. For example, on days of the year you didn't observe initially, say. And here, if we plot as a function of the degree of the polynomial, the error of these models, same models, in predicting observations, we see this U-shaped relationship. Statistical inference isn't easy. So if we have too few parameters, we suffer from some error, but if we have too many, we suffer from even greater error here. And there's this sweet spot in between. Now, hopefully you all know that. Hopefully you don't go around fitting models and then claiming success. But the important question I want to ask now is this kind of alludes to the statistical foundations of ecological rationality, is why does this happen? Why can we say more than this? So that often people appreciate this, but the reason why is often not really discussed. And the way that we've been looking at it in order to explain why simple heuristics perform so well is the following. If we look at the predictive accuracy, the prediction error of a statistical model, we can decompose it using what's called the bias variance decomposition. And so we can decompose it into 3 components: bias, variance, and noise. Now, noise we can do nothing about, but we can do something about bias and variance. These are the controllable components of prediction error. Okay, so most people kind of get what bias is. So bias is the bias component of prediction error reflects the inability of the model to capture what's systematic in the observations. For example, if I'd used a line to model London's mean daily temperature, we're going to be biased, right? The variance seems to be a lot harder for people to comprehend, but it's absolutely critical under uncertainty. And the variance component of prediction error reflects the sensitivity of the models from different kind of instances of the problem, or different samples from the same population, for example. So if we change some of the points we were inferring our model from, then our model changes potentially significantly. So the key point here is that variance reflects our sensitivity to the vagaries of the particular data we're estimating model parameters from. Okay. Now, and I should note here that the reason why Take the Best outperform those other models in that comparison I showed you is completely down to variance. Bias is irrelevant. The variance was critical. But the problem is, not many people appreciate this component of prediction error. Some do. So what I want to do now is just illustrate why this is important. So if we go back to that plot that I showed you before, so we're looking at as a function of the degree of the polynomial, the error. Let's decompose that prediction error into bias and variance. And what we see is, if we look at the bias, which is in blue, as the degree of the polynomial increases, the variance goes to 0 pretty quickly. But variance is very different. As the degree of the polynomial increases, bias increases quite significantly. And that's kind of underscores a more general observation we see, which is that overly complex models that tend to overfit tend to have low bias but high variance. Okay? Whereas overly simple models that tend to underfit tend to have high bias but low variance. So making accurate forecasts, making accurate predictions, making good decisions is fundamentally about striking a balance between these two quantities, these two components of prediction error. And that's why we see a dilemma. And this applies to all statistical models. Why? Well, because the methods we know for achieving low bias tend to increase variance. And the methods that we're aware of for achieving low variance tend to increase bias. Okay? There's always a balancing act. Okay, so with these kind of concepts in mind, I'm going to ask the question that we're all kind of here for, which is, well, the question I'm interested in, can macroeconomics benefit from the study of ecological rationality? And I think in one sense, it already has. So what I want to talk to you now is about some research done by Haldane and Medouros, who are at the Bank of England. Okay, so they're interested in the following question. To avoid financial crises, how should international banks be regulated? Okay? And using some of the research that I've been talking about and discussing, they made the following observational hypothesis, if you like, is that regulating a bank is a bit like catching a frisbee. Okay, so if you actually think about it, it's a horribly complex problem, lots and lots of variables you need to consider. And the response of the regulators is to fight this complexity with more and more complexity. Okay, so Haldane and Medouros note in their article that since the inception of the Basel Accord in 1988, where initially in Basel I you could write down the regulations in 30 pages, by 2010 with Basel III we're looking at over 600 pages to write down the regulations. And the number of parameters that banks have to estimate has shot up with greater growth. It's increased far faster than that. And this is an example, the response of the regulators is an example of what Gerd Gigerenzer and I call the bias bias, which is one symptom of the bias bias. The bias bias is just this perception which cuts across disciplines, where people tend to view problems of forecasting, decision-making, etc., through the lens of bias, largely at the complete neglect of variance. And this leads to very questionable theory and questionable practices. Haldane and Medouros, on the other hand, took a really interesting route. What they're interested in was predicting bank failure. And they showed that using very simple models, just by, for example, looking at the leverage ratio, you can outperform these far more complex models, which are implied by the regulator's response to this problem. They had a really nice quote in their article, which is simple doesn't just trump complex, it trumps the truth. And that is an implication of the bias variance perspective. Okay, so remember, take the best, outperform those other models because it didn't compute the covariance matrix. That's not because there aren't those relationships there. The reason is that we can't reliably estimate them. So we perform much better by completely ignoring them. And that's essentially the point that Haldane and Medouros found in their analyses too. So what I would say is, if you're interested in this kind of way of looking at problems and way of formulating solutions, I'd suggest reading 2 articles, and the 2 articles are very simple titles. So Haldane and Medouros' article is called The Dog and the Frisbee, and the article by Gigerenzer and I is called The Bias Bias. If you want to know more, that's where I'd look. Okay, I'm running out of time, aren't I?
You've got about 4 minutes.
Okay, final slide. So what have I been talking about? Well, I've addressed the question, or I'm interested in the question of, well, faced with uncertainty, what are rational decisions? And I hope it's clear that what I've done is contrasted the orthodox with ecological rationality. So the orthodox view is, or the guiding assumption of decision theory is we can quantify uncertainty. By hook or by crook, we can quantify uncertainty using a whole range of very sophisticated methods. What I want to do is distinguish between worlds in which that makes sense and worlds where it doesn't make sense. So in worlds in which it makes sense, yes, mathematical statistics is king, it's beautiful. Rational decision makers are Bayesian maximizers of expected utility. I'd also say that optimality is a meaningful concept. Also, bias is key because we're implicitly assuming, or at least, that we have lots of observations and we're kind of interested in asymptotic results where n tends to infinity. What I focused on is a completely different world. It's a world where it's more rational to accept the unquantifiable. Okay? And this is the question which ecological rationality addresses, and its response is this notion of ecological rationality explored through algorithmic models called simple heuristics. Okay? And it's in this kind of world, in this kind of setup, we're not in the business. Well, let me tell you what we are in the business of. We're in the business of comparing the ability of competing algorithms to reduce uncertainty, not the ability of a single probabilistic model to resolve uncertainty. Okay, this is predictive statistics, not explanatory statistics. This echoes deeper divisions in statistics itself. Furthermore, optimality in this world is largely meaningless. That's a crucial point. And as hopefully I've made clear, that variance is key bias and variance are key, but variance is often overlooked and is absolutely crucial to making good decisions, accurate forecasts, good models. Okay, I better stop there.
Yeah, thank you. Bang on.